In London, April is a spring month. Hello and welcome to ELLROY Reads. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing such an elaborate disguise, it's because the theme of today's show is spying and all things espionage. And our book for today's episode is The Cellist by Daniel Silva. So if you're unfamiliar with ELLROY Reads, this is the show where every week I look at a book that was highly influential in the life and work of James Ellroy, a book that he has admired intellectually or emotionally, and a book that he has taken a succor from or that has inspired him. And the story behind his love, his absolute devotion to the Daniel Silva's Gabriel Allon series, is more recent than many of the books that we've covered. Many of his greatest inspirations come in childhood, in adolescence, in his 20s. That tends to be the age where we're the most receptive to outside influences and we're the most inspired. Um, when Alroy got back together with Helen Canode, his second wife, she sent him on a big reading binge. I think it was one of her conditions. She recommended, look, you stopped reading for a while, and there were reasons why he'd stopped reading. He didn't want any outside influences. She felt perhaps that some of his prose had become a bit too, dictated, and she said it's time for you to just open up a little bit to outside influences. And I always absolutely loved going back to reading in a big way. And it was a colleague, Alfred A. Knopf, who recommended the Daniel Silva's novels, and he Alroy's absolutely devoured them. Okay, so let's give you a little bit of background on Daniel Silva. Daniel Silva was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and he began his career as a journalist, moved to Washington, D.C., where he worked for UPI, and UPI later transferred him to Cairo, where he became their Middle East correspondent. And he's married to Jamie Gangel, who is currently CNN's correspondent. And she often comes up in the acknowledgements to his books as being a major influence and a major advisor on all the foreign policy details that are in his books. And Silva, who was raised Catholic, converted to Judaism, which is his wife's faith. And Judaism is a big theme in these books because there are over 20 of the Gabriel Allon books so far. And Gabriel Allon is many things. He is a spy, he is an Israeli spy for the Israeli intelligence service, which is referred to in the novels as the Office, but we all know it as Mossad. In fact, many characters are referred to, current historical characters like Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and we know who they are, even though usually the names aren't mentioned. Joe Biden. Occasionally, we have fictional prime ministers, such as Jonathan Lancaster, who's the Prime Minister of Britain in this. But broadly speaking, these books, very, very contemporary. They're keeping abreast of modern events, and they're working them into the narrative. They're very, very good. Allon is from an artistic family, and he was going to be a painter, but he was called to arms after the massacre of the Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics, and he took part with the Office in Operation Wrath of God, which was the mission to assassinate the Black September terrorists who had perpetrated that massacre. And that begins a long and distinguished career with the Office. Now, when you think about how long ago the Munich Olympics were, the early 1970s, and you think if that's when he started his intelligence career, how old would he be today? It requires a little bit of magical thinking, but broadly speaking, we know that he's gone through middle age, and we know he's in kind of early old age right now, but he's still, even in the later novels like this one, The Cellist, which is one of the more recent novels, Gabriel Allon, who has now become Director General of the Office, has now become like this national figure. Like, there's no secret who he is anymore. Broadly, he's still in the action, he's still in the thick of it, and Silva's quite good at making that seem plausible, even though in real life, maybe that's not so plausible. But The Cellist is, to me, one of the most fascinating novels in the series. The reason I picked it is Elroy told me that he read these novels so quickly that he couldn't pick one out as his favorite, as it were, or as the most influential to him, because they kind of all merged into one. And you can read them. I haven't read every book in the series, and I've read them out of order, I have to admit, but you can read them pretty much. You can pick up any book in the series and pretty much get the gist of it without having to go back and reread previous books. There are very brief recaps, which are brief and informative, and just put you right where the story is at this time, so you don't feel lost at sea or anything. So the basic plot of The Cellist is that a wealthy Russian emigre in London, is poisoned by a nerve agent by President Putin's FSB, SVR, Secret Service, in retaliation for his criticism of the Putin regime, and the assassin, who's suspected of being the assassin, has actually brought him the poison unknowingly. She had a legitimate meeting with him, and that kind of maliciously ingenious method actually penetrated his very, very tight security. So Allon begins to investigate this, and he feels that he needs to wreak some sort of vengeance on Putin, and he devises this elaborate scheme to hurt Putin the most, which is his wallet. And his thinking is that Putin's war against the West, specifically the United States, lies in disinformation and the troll factories, which are churning out ultra right-wing propaganda. They're radicalizing the young people of all ages in the United States, and particularly, the conservative right. They're kind of infiltrating it. And that's where it gets kind of interesting, because this book is very, very anti-Trump. It's based at the tail end of the Trump presidency, where Trump has lost the 2020 election and is contesting the results under false claims of electoral fraud. And he's backed up here by the Russian disinformation machine, which is very, very sophisticated, very well funded, which is spreading these lies on the internet. And there are many, many criticisms of Trump, right through to the fact that the Russians did help him in the 2016 election campaign, and he barely denied that. There are specific moments where, a specific incident where Trump has criticized that he gave high-level intelligence to the Russian foreign minister. That was intelligence at the highest level that compromised an operation against Islamic State in the Middle East. And the references the CIA director was just not, especially towards the tail end of the Trump presidency, was just not giving Trump the highest level intelligence, and he was giving him very, very diluted intelligence files. And of course, since stepping down from office, Trump has not received intelligence briefings like other former US presidents. But and this references to the fact that if you put it in a written file, he probably won't read it. And it's very well very well plotted. We have Allon devises an elaborate scheme with the cellist of the title, a beautiful cellist called Isabel Brenner, to pull off this very, very elaborate money laundering scheme through Switzerland, through one of the banks that made its fortune building Auschwitz and holding onto the accounts of the Nazis. So it's a little bit of poetic justice there, in that they get ripped off, and really hurting Putin. Now Silva, I don't know if anyone's switched off, because obviously if you're an Elroy reader, you might be conservative like Elroy. And when I first started reading the early novels, I thought Silva was quite conservative. Not necessarily the conservative in a Republican way, but conservative about the Constitution and conservative about themes of national defense. The early novels I felt were very, very critical of President Obama, because they were written during Obama's administration, in that Obama really played down the threat from a revanchist Russia and the threat from President Putin. And I feel like Silva has been vindicated in this regard, and if anything, President Obama has been proven wrong. But I think Silva was, well, whether he's conservative or liberal, whatever label he likes to call himself, I don't want to speak for him. He is definitely disgusted by President Trump and his vandalism of the U.S. Constitution, and sees him as a massive security threat. Not only that he was leaking secrets to the Russians, but that he was hell bent on pulling the US out of NATO, and that he's not the man to stand up to Russia, and he seems to have a kind of playground bullies mutual admiration for Putin. So the novels have kind of changed in that they've gone through a kind of political evolution. You might say that he feels like some of them, the kind of conservative right in America has changed perhaps more than Silva has, and his views have always been the same in terms of the defense of the West, the defense of Israel, has always been extremely important to him. And as far as the office is concerned and Gabriel Allon, they will work in the U.S. with whoever defends them the best, and they felt, they see President Trump as a major threat. And then this book, once the kind of money laundering scheme is wrapped up quite nicely, there were still a few chapters to go, and I was just like, where's it going to go? I was really kind of confused as to why I still had 40, 50 pages still ahead of me. But then there was a very, very good epilogue, which pays it off very nicely, about a mainstream US politician being radicalized. And it goes into QAnon and the various kind of really crazy conspiracy theories right now regarding kind of bloodsucking and Satanism and all these things. But how it does show you how a kind of normal or even distinguished person could be radicalized, and it climaxes with the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, and also the inauguration of President Biden shortly thereafter. And it wraps up quite nicely. And I was really, really impressed with Daniel Silva in terms of how he ties it all together, these modern events. I because I read ELLROY, I spend a lot of time as his biographer and as a scholar of his work reading about events in the 1940s and 1950s. So I spend a lot of time reading historical novelists, and I haven't read many novels that are kind of set in a contemporary setting that are trying to make sense of some of the really radical and groundbreaking events that are happening right now. COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown plays very, very much into this novel. Well, there's a slight author's note at the end saying I had to free things up from lockdown a little bit, otherwise you can't have characters who can't move at all. From Silva, he's quite honest about that. The author's notes at the end are always very, very good. And so Silva's the first novelist I've read who's really made sense of the last 20 years, or even the last 2 years. Things seem to be moving so fast now. If you've got any other recommendations for novelists who do the same for you, just pop them in the comment thread or drop me an email. And don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscription button. It's down here next to the like button. Hit it. In terms of ELLROY, if we can go a bit deeper and say it's not just the fact that he loves these novels, and I know he was very, very excited, because Silva's quite prolific. He usually gets out one Gabriel Allon novel a year, and there's usually, towards the end, some sort of almost James Bond will return. Gabriel Allon will return in terms of, some sort of promise that he's going to stay in the game, even at his advancing age. He's still got the physical capability and the mental capability, and he's still remarkably good looking, even in his dotage. He's on his second marriage now. He's got a beautiful Italian wife. I know ELLROY was very, very excited year on year to read the next one. And ELLROY did make some comments about turning his hand to spy fiction and writing a spy fiction trilogy. He was so jazzed by these novels by Daniel Silva. That's one of the things that he's spoken about. Now, in terms of his long-range plans, he's conscious of his age. He's actually committed to finishing this Fred Otash Alley Quintet, as I believe it now is. He's staying. He's revised his Alley Quintet plans. He's moved them to the 1960s, but it's still LA. It's still the 1960s. It's still his usual territory where he feels comfortable. So he's not writing that kind of spy trilogy on these terms. But when you think about it, intelligence work has always played a really strong role in James Ellroy's novels, particularly since the Underworld USA trilogy, because we have CIA characters like John Stanton running clandestine operations, some of them sanctioned, some of them not, in Cuba, in Vietnam, in the Golden Triangle, and we have a lot of detail about intelligence operations in Ellroy's work, and even the FBI. The FBI, and Ellroy's been very, very good at this, has been portrayed in Ellroy's works, The LA Quartet and Underworld USA, as much more than just a crime-fighting organization. It's an intelligence organization, and some of Ellroy's best scenes have been the document transcripts between J. Edgar Hoover and his special agents out there, and not just because there's like a lot of kind of almost covert flirting between Hoover's repressed homosexuality and these handsome men he keeps in his employ, but because we get a glimpse into the intelligence world and how the FBI operated under Hoover in the 50s and 60s, where it was much more interested it wasn't interested in organized crime so much. It was much more interested in what was considered subversive elements in the civil rights movement, the far left on US campuses, and the COINTELPRO operations to discredit Martin Luther King and various other civil rights leaders. So there's been a lot about the intelligence in the intelligence community in Ellroy's fiction. And, you could read Ellroy's novels through and then pick up Silva's novels. And there's only about a 20-year gap because the first Silva novel was published in 2001, from where 20 to 30-year gap from where kind of Ellroy stops in 1972 and where Silva picks up. And it's very, very interesting to read these Ellroy and Silva as kind of like a long line of historical novels, because now, the subversive organizations in the US are not the Weather Underground, or certainly not the Civil Rights Movement, or any of the other, the Symbionese Liberation Army, or anything like that. It is QAnon and the other far right, really out there organizations. And now, the philosophy hasn't changed that much. They're all they're all anti-establishment, or they've kind of got even loopier. The methods have changed with the internet and Telegram and encrypted messages and the radicalization. The methods have changed, but the philosophy hasn't changed that much. So yeah, Daniel Silva, any of the Daniel Silva novels, they're all brilliant. The Cellist is one of my favorites. They're all great. Pick one up. Try to read them in chronological order if you can, but it's not essential. And perhaps you'll love them as much as James Ellroy does. Okay, thanks very much. I'll see you next time for another episode of ELLROY Reads. Now I'm going to go out and enjoy the sun. Okay, bye-bye.